All right, welcome everyone to another episode of the Strive for Good Life podcast. My name is Nino Pagera, and I'm here with Mark Silver, the owner of Heart-Centered Business. Is that correct? Or did I
The book is
butcher?
Heart-Centered Business, and the business is Heart of Business.
Heart of
It's
Business. Okay.
very similar, so there's some overlap there.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for being here. I'm super excited to, share your story with the audience and talk about what you've been up to. So, thank you for being here and welcome to the show.
Yeah, I'm delighted. Thank you for having me.
So let's just go ahead and jump right into, what started you on your entrepreneurial journey, starting from when you were a kid.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting. I mean, the truth is I grew up in business. My grandfather on my mother's side was uh, he was a pharmacist who sold alcohol by prescription during Prohibition in the United States.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and when Prohibition ended, he started a wine store. And that was the family business. And my mom had started several businesses, small ones, relatively small, but, like a consignment shop and some other things. And I just I grew up around like, oh yeah, people have businesses, people start businesses. It just felt very possible to me. And I think my first, there's so many different details we can get into there, but it's like, yeah, a friend of mine and I started like a computer quote unquote consulting company as teenagers. And this was in the early 1980s, the era of the Apple II Plus. And so it was just like a lot of adults didn't know how to deal with computers. So that's how we could start like something like that. And so business just seemed like a natural, like being self-employed or starting a business it seemed kind of natural. And then I kind of started to open my eyes later in my teen years through punk music and through other things to the politics of the dysfunction in our culture, especially around business. And I actually saw a lot of really painful things happening because of moneyed interests in politics and in business. And I spent a lot of time in protest and activism of various kinds. And so, that's my origins were kind of like this mix of like, oh, business, huh. And,
Right.
and wrestling with that.
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting dynamic because on the one hand, the model in our country allows businesses to succeed. It allows people like you and me to start things. But on the other hand, the flip side of that is that there are a lot of people that exploit that and are so focused on profit and, that it leads to a lot of corruption. It leads to a lot of negative, externalities as a result of that. So I guess, yeah, despite that, though, you seem to continue to move forward. Like a lot of people get turned off from business in general, right? They become anti-capitalist and just say, not for me.
I am anti-capitalist. I'm very firmly against capitalism. But commerce and trade has existed in humanity as long as we've been around. Capitalism is a relatively recent modern invention, last few hundred years, and has a really toxic, deadly effect on our cultures and on our lives. But I did turn away from it. I was a paramedic for a good bit of time. I was in the nonprofit world, running a nonprofit magazine. I only returned to business because I had really good friends of mine who were self-employed, organic gardeners, healers, different types of people who are trying to do good in the world. And they're like, how do I be in business? And I had learned a lot more. I knew a lot more, and I had learned a lot more than I realized I had, especially running a nonprofit magazine and the way I had grown up, and then embracing learning more about it. And so it's like, okay, so there are people that are going to be self-employed because there's no jobs like that. There's people that are going to start businesses and have small businesses because it's an important part of how we engage with community and with, helping people and with, caring for ourselves. How do we do this ethically? How do we do this with love? How do we do this with the heart at the center of how, in collective care rather than just, out for ourselves. And so that was really the beginning of my journey into Heart of Business, which, 1999 was like the beginnings of that. And then 2001 was the official start of Heart of Business.
I love that. I think it's incredibly important to be ethical in all of your business dealings. But I guess, I'm kind of interested what you would say to the people that, say, well, you are kind of a capitalist because you still have to, in a business, any kind of business, you have to have some kind of profit focus or it collapses on itself, right? So, well, I guess I'm just curious because, I don't, I in no way am I trying to take a side or anything. I'm just curious as to what your response is to people that would argue that.
Well, I would say that people who say that probably don't thoroughly understand what capitalism is exactly. I think that there's a lot of misconceptions. Like anytime you're in business, anytime you're in commerce or trade of some sort, anytime you're selling something, that's capitalism. That's not capitalism. Capitalism, is associated with a very specific kind of historical structure, starting, some people date it back to like the Dutch East India tea company, and how and the beginnings of the idea of corporations, where you don't have individual responsibility, you have this legal entity that shields people from individual accountability, where you have wealthy capitalists who are owning the means of production, they're owning the they own the business, but they're not doing the work, and the workers aren't getting paid appropriately at all, and sometimes a lot of wage theft, et cetera, et cetera. And so, I'm not a capitalist in that sense because I don't own the structure that, it's like I own the business, and we have people who work for us, but, the finances are pretty transparent. We pay people a good wage. There's not that many people involved in our business. And we're not trying to exploit them. I'm not using the ownership of the company as a way to extract value off of somebody else's labor to their detriment. And so there's a lot more there. I mean, I don't want to try to give a
Right.
deep dive into like what is capitalism and
Right.
what's involved with it. But there's there's a lot there, and there's a lot of history there. I mean, like the origins of capitalism are also, or the development of capitalism, not the origins, but the development of capitalism is deeply tied up with chattel slavery here in the United States. So, the stock exchanges, people were trading on enslaved people in the United States, anyway, there's so much bound up in it that when you actually understand what it is that we're dealing with, it's very easy to be anti-capitalist while still, believing that, people can engage in trade and commerce with the other people in the community in a healthy way. I'll add one more thing and say that in the United States, the beginning of the 20th century, half of the population was self-employed, the majority of them on family farms. But self-employment, having your own business, operating in a kind of semi-independent way or interdependent way and not in a job for someone else, was just how things were done for so much of humanity, and indeed in this country as well. But the global corporations and this very explicitly capitalist approach to how we deal with how people work, how people earn their living, and how we apportion the wealth that's generated. The capitalist approach to that is all very toxic and exploitative.
Yeah. I can see that point, definitely. And there's so much that we could get into with that, right? The politics of that. I mean, as on the other side of capitalism, I mean, what if that's the system that we're not trying to use, then, what would the other options be? So without getting into any of that, because that's another discussion for another show, I do agree that we need to be ethical in all our dealings, like I said, and try to do good in the world. I believe in entrepreneurship because of the ability it has to impact things positively for everyone. And that's what I like to focus on: the freedom that it can create in your own life, the opportunities it can create in the lives of others if you're employing
Yes.
them like you're doing, being able to pay a livable wage. I think that's great. I think we should, as business owners, all strive for that type of business and those types of practices. So I love that. And I love that you've built a business around that. So maybe tell people exactly what you do with your business.
Yeah. So we do business training, coaching, and healing for small businesses, people who want to make a difference in the world, and their business needs to work. Oftentimes people that are trying to really make the world a better place in a variety of ways. And we have both a developmental model that was built over more than 2 decades of observing thousands of small businesses of like, oh, how does a business develop in a healthy manner? Like, what do you focus on first? And then what's the next stage and what's the next stage, so that you can have a sense of how to develop the business rather than just randomly, oh my God, I've got to do this and put this in place. Oh my God, I need a website, put that in place. And we also have a model, like a healthy relationship-based model of marketing that we call the 3 journeys of marketing. And a lot of other pieces about like, how do you approach each of the aspects of business that need very kind of nitty gritty practical things put in place? How do you hold a sales conversation? How do you create systems? How do you do your planning? How do you do your scheduling? Like, how do you do like so many different pieces? But how do you do that with love at the center? How do you do that with care at the center of it all without harming ourselves, without harming other people? How do we make the business as beautiful as the work that you want to do in the world?
I love that. That's powerful. It's a service that is so needed, because I think, especially for new business owners, entrepreneurs that are getting started, it can be so overwhelming to look at the to-do list of what it takes to set up and run a business. And especially because we're always comparing ourselves to, others that have already made it, that are already successful. And so we look at their systems and we imagine, man, if I can't do it on that level, I mean, what am I doing even trying, right? So
Yeah,
that's exactly why we need people like you. Go ahead.
it's so true that we need this understanding of like how businesses develop. We over the years, so many people come to us going, "Oh my God, my business is broken," and I always want to just like, "Oh, we need a big hug here. We need to kind of slow down and not be so judgmental on the business or on ourselves." I'm a parent. My wife and I, we have twin teen sons, and they're becoming very independent, which is amazing to watch that. But when they were much younger, it's like there wasn't, it's like they couldn't cook meals, they couldn't like help clean the house, they couldn't, like, there were things that they couldn't do. But I wouldn't say that they were broken, like there was something wrong with them. They were just young. They just weren't developmentally there. The same is true for a lot of businesses, that there may be things that need to be improved or things that need to be, tweaked or iterated or even repaired sometimes. But the business itself usually is just in a place developmentally where it can't do what you want it to do yet. And so we need to develop the business, not fix it. We need to help it move through stages of development until it can really carry you. Like, we do end up carrying the business in the early stages of it, in the same way that we end up caring for our kids, or really anything that's in our, it's in our realm of our lives. But now, it's like, okay, time to clean the house, and the kids just go and they complain a little bit, but not a lot. But they do all the vacuuming and the dusting, and they get the trash taken out, and like, I do my bit, I clean the bathroom or whatever. But it's like there's a functionality, there's a development that has happened that enables them to operate more and more and more like adults. And we're like, thank goodness it doesn't take a business, 18 to 20 years to grow into that kind of, that it doesn't, but it does take some time. It usually takes somewhere between 3, 4, maybe 5 years to go from the first stage of development through steady focus on the developmental pieces to get to a place of momentum, to get to a place of where the business can really function dependably and can really care for you and it's sustainable.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I'm just out of curiosity, what are some of the biggest levers to pull to accelerate that process? Because I know there are a million ways to go about it, a ton of different pieces to work on. So what are maybe the biggest ones to start putting in place and make sure you have nailed down for anyone listening out there?
Yeah. So the biggest one is to embrace the journey. I know it sounds like I'm kind of dodging the question, but we have a list in the back of my book. There's a list of I don't know, how many did I say? Like over 100 different items that get put into place in the business, 110 items on it. And and we like to think oh, what are the most important ones? But the truth is that each time you put another piece in place, the business works a little bit better, and another piece works a little bit better. I think our culture loves to think in terms of silver bullets, or in terms of what's the thing that's going to help. And I want to say that the thing that helps is being willing to put the little things in place over time and watching it continue to get better and better and better. Now, a lot of times what people will see is okay, so if let's simplify it and say there's 10 items instead of 110, and people will go, okay, well, I'll put A, B, C, D, E in place. Oh, some big jump happened when I put E in place. So that must be the silver bullet. But then other people will go, we'll do it in a different order. They'll go E, B, C, D, A. And then there's a big jump and it's oh, A must have been the big, but it's just, you put enough in place that the business starts to be able to sustain itself. There's enough pieces in place, and that, things start to work together. It starts to get a little easier, So I resist trying to focus in on that. Is it the most important thing to figure out who your audience is, or is it the most important thing to get the website in place, or is the most important thing to craft your offers, so that they're functional, or is it the most important thing to learn how to hold a sales conversation ethically, or is it the most important thing to learn what sustainable pricing is for you that meets your audience, or is do you get what I'm there's all these pieces that if one of them is missing, the whole business isn't going to function as well.
Absolutely. And I brought it up because we had this conversation last time we were on the call, and I really enjoyed that piece. But it is the flywheel concept. If you've ever read Good to Great, right? Each piece is another push, and eventually that momentum picks up and you're rolling, right? So yeah, I completely agree with you. I don't think there ever is a silver bullet that just magically works, right?
Right.
Let's talk about, because you did mention pricing, and you have kind of a unique way of doing that more ethically as well. And I know that's kind of a tough piece for people to get right. So what would you say specifically about pricing?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's there are different models for pricing, and the one that you're alluding to when we have this model for not all of our offers, but a lot of our offers are what we call pay from the heart, which isn't exactly pay what you want, and it's not exactly a sliding scale, although there are elements of both of those in this. But that kind of pricing is not accessible to everyone. It's not always appropriate depending on where your business is and what your own heart is needing and what the business is needing. But what we've done with pay from the heart after a lot of experimentation is to figure out a way where we identify what's the sustainable, what's the minimum price that will help us to make this offer worthwhile for us to make it work. And what's the ideal price? What's the price that helps us thrive? And we put it out there. one of the things I like to say is that a majority of sales and marketing problems can be solved through honesty. And we're just honest. We're saying, the business has needs. We've got payroll, we've got people we've got to care for. This is our minimum price. It doesn't feel good less than this. This is the price we're actually asking for. And we're okay anywhere in there. You check in with your own needs in your own heart. And in some of our offers, we even have a place where, if you're in an economy or you're in a personal situation where paying even the minimum is going to put your food and shelter at risk, you can pay less than the minimum. But we're very specific. It's not just like, I'm feeling a little nervous about my finances because we took a vacation a few months ago, so I'm going to pay less. It's not that. It's like, like if your survival is threatened, please, and you feel like you need this offer, you can pay less than the minimum. And we have all of this explained in really clear terms, hopefully in a non-complicated way. And it's, for me, a way to meet people where they are and meet us where we are, and to also not put a burden on people to apply for scholarships or other kinds of ways that people get financial assistance. One of the things that happens in our society is that everything is less expensive when you're rich. You don't, payment plans cost more than paying in bulk, paying at once. You don't have to pay interest on debt, because you don't have any. It's like you often, have access to certain deals and things when you have wealth. But when you don't have wealth, not only is it more expensive for you, but when you apply, when you're needing assistance or support accessing some kind of resource, they often make you jump through hoops, like, fill out this application, or there's a work study, or there's other things that put an additional burden on people who don't have access to financial resources. And we don't do that. We try to, like if you're paying for one of our services in payments, it costs exactly the same as if you paid it all at once. If if you really need our services and you're going to one of our offers that has this set up, you can pay less than the minimum and we're still being cared for. So it's one of the ways that we try to meet, the call for justice, the call for care, collective care, the call for, real love and compassion for ourselves and for people that are struggling, that need support.
I love that. I think a lot of us would do well to learn from alternative models like yours, and find ways to not be gatekeepers, right, in the world. And I think there are too many already. I'm glad that the internet exists, that is kind of opening the doors, making it easier to access information and services. But within our businesses, we can absolutely do more to make things accessible, and obviously not at the detriment of the business, right? That's still important. And I think that's what you're saying.
It's really important. Let me add, if it's okay, I want to add one more piece, because this is something that we talk to clients about quite a lot, is that a lot of the people that we're working with are, single parents, or, people who have a chronic illness or disability sometimes, or people of color that are, dealing with, various kinds of oppressions in culture, and just people that are dealing with a lot of challenges. And hope people who are in those situations see how people are struggling, often very clearly. And there's a natural desire to want to help. And of course we want to help. And I always want to caution people not to not help, but to not feel like you personally have to make up for systemic injustices on your own back. Because again, that's what's asked for, right? A lot of times women are asked to do more and to give more than men. It's like there's a lot of different ways, and a lot of that this is that these kinds of burdens are placed on people. And so, yes, absolutely, let's figure out a smart way, a sustainable way to help people in need, but let's not do it in a way that harms you in the process. It may be that your business needs to get to a more stable place before you can help as much as you'd like. It may be that you're just a lot more cautious and making sure you're paying attention to your own needs, so that there's a certain number of slots that are low income. It's like our business is at a place where it's like, yeah, for this course, anybody just come and you figure it out. But maybe somebody in an earlier stage or in a different situation says, you know what, we only have a certain number of these low income slots, and this is how we're going to deal with it. So I so want people to thrive. I so want people to thrive, and I want all of us to thrive, and I want this culture to be so much more beautiful and caring. But I don't want an individual who has so much to give the world, to drown, attempting to lift too many people up at once. I want us to do that collectively so that we're all cared for.
Absolutely. It's that old analogy, with the airplane, where you have to put your own oxygen mask on first before you can then apply it to someone else.
Right.
And that's absolutely true in business. Okay. Let's talk about some of the challenges that you've personally faced in your years of experience with business. And you briefly mentioned working for the nonprofit, but we haven't really touched on that. So maybe include that as well. So over your tenure as an entrepreneur.
So many mistakes and challenges. Yeah. I mean, when I was running a nonprofit magazine, I was a micromanager. Like, I had my fingers in everybody's business, and it wasn't helpful. It wasn't empowering for them. It exhausted me. It exhausted all of us. We couldn't get beyond a certain level because I had my own, and I was young at the time. I was, I guess I was in my late 20s, and I just didn't know myself, and I didn't have a sense of trust in myself. And that translated into a lack of trust in others that was not warranted. And so that was something, and that took a long time. Even coming into this business, I had to really become really humble. And the first time, the times when I was hiring assistants, I had to really face myself and say, I don't know how to be a boss. I've never worked in a corporate structure. Nobody's ever trained me, and ask my whoever I was hiring as an assistant, saying, can you help me learn to be a good boss? Can you, I need some help here, and, be open to feedback. I think that I've made a lot of mistakes around holding too high a standard. I tend to be someone who's very mission oriented, and I have a real love for justice. And I think when I was younger, avoided some collaborations that would have been beneficial for the business. But I was I think I was I was up on my high horse. I was being a little too superior. And I think that cost the business and cost our clients, because we weren't showing up for them. I think that there's ways that I've had to really learn to take my own medicine, repeatedly. We've come up with a number of structures, and when the business has stumbled, and the structures and the learnings and the wisdom that we have to teach are things that I've observed and seen through experience. It's not something I just made up in my head. And when our business has stumbled, it's because I'm not paying attention to my own learned wisdom, right? It's like, oh, we've been neglecting that part of the business. Maybe there's an aspect of marketing we've been neglecting, and that's why things are starting to slow down, and we need to bring some attention there. And I think that another thing that I would add in this little run, I could go on for some time, is really allowing the space for spiritual practice, for taking the time to connect in my own heart and connect with love, and not let the seeming urgency of whatever I'm looking at say, well, there's not time to slow down. I learned that lesson early where I heard that lesson early. When I was a paramedic, when I was in paramedic school, our instructor said, no matter how bad the scene is, there's always time to take your own pulse. And that was really true, and I took that to heart when I was a first responder for many years. But in business, although I could remember that when I was helping other people on the team or helping clients, it was something that I had trouble sometimes accessing for myself. Like, no matter what has to be done, no matter what's on the to-do list, there's time to stop, breathe, and connect with my own heart, and do whatever practices I do to connect with love, to connect with the divine, to connect with the mystery and the infinite, and to allow myself to feel cared for, and to allow that wisdom and guidance and resourcefulness to fill me, rather than just pushing and pushing and pushing. And because when I push, I harm myself and I harm others, and the business doesn't do as well.
Yeah. Is there some kind of a ritual or routine that you have to kind of keep yourself in check with that? A lot of people talk about their morning routines, right? So I don't know if you have something like that, or if you just have it set to a timer, to take a couple minutes in the middle of the day, or how do you do that?
Yeah, there's an app for that. So
I'm sure.
So I'm Sufi Muslim, and so I have a prayer app on my phone that does the call to prayer. There's Muslims pray 5 times a day, and so it goes off. It does not go off in the middle of the night, because I don't, I don't want to affect other people around me. But it's like it interrupts my day. It's like, oh, it's time for the prayer. It's time to, and one of the things that I love about Islam, and there's so many different ways we have to connect, right? There's so many different paths, and I love all the different ways that humanity has to connect with the love. But in Islam, when you make a prayer, it's called making salah. And salah literally means connection. It doesn't mean prayer in any particular sense, like we might in English think, oh, a prayer is a petitionary thing that you have with a deity. But it's making a connection with the oneness, making a connection with the source that we're not separate from, remembering that we are not separate, that love is present everywhere. And I love that. And so to be reminded, and to take even just a few minutes. I mean, I can make prayer and, in 4 or 5 minutes. And it's just a beautiful reset and a beautiful reconnection.
Yeah, I love that. I'm religious as well, and I definitely feel the difference when I miss out on my prayers or my studies, right? And it definitely grounds me. And I love the idea that you mentioned of salah, is it meaning to connect, because that's absolutely what it is. If I'm saying my prayers just to say them and I'm not feeling connected, it's like there's no point, right? So I think that's a great reminder to anyone listening to really seek connection. And in business, that's so true as well, right? With your customers, you have to connect with their needs to be able to serve them.
Yes.
And that lack of connection, I think, is a challenge we're facing in many facets of our society, right? And it's interesting how technology, it seems like we're more connected, but in reality, it's just created barriers to really feel for each other and connect spiritually. So I love that as a reminder in general. And it's so applicable, I think, in the way that we show up for our business. So thank you. I want to touch on, in our last call, you mentioned the 4 stages of developing a business. I want to talk about that because I think that's really helpful.
Yeah, I love this. It was so interesting to me that after I've been in business for some years, and I already worked with a large number of businesses, small businesses, and I really began to see like, oh, there's all these different pieces that need to be put in place. But then I began to see like, oh, if you like, there's a seems to be a somewhat natural order. Not that you have to do it the same every business, some things go in different orders, but there's this general kind of flow that I think really serves. And so the first stage I call creation. And it's really about putting these very basic fundamentals in place about like, okay, so who is your audience and what are you helping them with? Like, how do you craft an offer? How do you price it? How do you hold a sales conversation? How do you ask for referrals? What is a deeper message, what we call the customer focused story of your business? You put these elements in place, and it's like the bottom of a bowl. So many people jump into the, like the more visible, sexier parts of a business, like the website and, marketing, social media advertising, all these things that people want to get you going on. But that's like building the sides of the bowl before you put the bottom in place. And I know people who have sometimes mostly struggled with that when they do it out of order, but sometimes it built up very large audiences, but there's no money coming in because they don't have the basics in place, these really fundamentals. So after creation, you move into what I call concentration, which is when you start to do some of these other things, you start to put some other marketing pieces in place that start to put the 3 journeys of marketing in place. You start to have your website in place. You start to think about other kinds of offers. You start to think about maybe hiring the first people in the business. That depending on the kind of business, some businesses you'll have started out with employees, but a lot of tiny businesses you can start out with just yourself before adding other people in. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to take the fundamentals and expand your reach to grow your audience so that you can just do more of what was working in the first stage. And then you are ready to move into the third stage. And generally what happens near the end of the second stage is this feast or famine dynamic. And what happens is the marketing is working, everything's working, you're making money, but you have gotten so busy that you can't keep up with everything. And so the marketing falls off, some of these other pieces fall off that made the business successful. And then your clients naturally complete or drop off. And so you get some time and space back, and then you go back to doing the things that made the business work. But there's a lag time. It's not like turning on a faucet. These are relationships and people, and it takes some time to get it started again. And this creates this feast or famine cycle at the end of the second stage. And to move firmly into the third stage, what I call momentum, you need just the right amount of team, which for a lot of businesses does not include employees, but sometimes can. You need systems in place that are heart-centered, that don't take the humanity out of it, don't take the love out of it, but allow the business to function in sustainable ways. You need to look at business model and having some consciousness about, okay, how do my offers fit together to both meet the needs of the people and the business? And you often need more sophisticated marketing structures that really make it, that really help maintain the flow that you need for the business to really be in momentum, for it to be dependable. There is a fourth stage of business that you have to get through the first 3 stages if you want the business to be solid. The fourth stage, what I call independence, is optional. And it's optional because it's about an entirely different type of business. It's where you are creating the situation where the business can function independently of you. You're putting a team in place. You're often having other people be able to provide the services instead of you. And there's a scale that has to happen in the business, which doesn't need to be national or international. It doesn't have to be millions, but there's a scale that needs to happen in order to sustain that size of a team and that kind of a business, to be able to pay that many people. And it requires the owner, founder, to professionalize in a way that they haven't had to before. They have to learn how to become a CEO and how to run a team and how to really think about business in a completely different way. And it takes a lot of resources to get there successfully. A lot of people reach for that and stumble. And a lot of times when people are wanting a successful business, they're thinking they need that fourth stage. But what they really need is just a really well-running third stage business, and they'll be totally happy.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I want to touch on something you said about the business owner needing to become more than he is, because I find, especially in small businesses, right, the owner is typically the one fulfilling the service or building the products. They're very entrenched in what the business does, and they have a hard time stepping back and actually focusing on the growth of the business. And so, obviously there are people like you that can help, those types of people, but what would you say to someone struggling to have that shift? I mean, what are some things that help make that transition for someone?
Yeah. There's a lot about what I wrote Heart-Centered Business for, what I wrote my big book about, because I think one of the biggest things is just coming into a healthier relationship with business. A lot of times people have for some of the reasons we were talking about earlier, a really justifiable negative reaction to business and a negative reaction to a lot of the aspects of business because, quite frankly, they've been done horribly by a lot of people. And so that keeps them often in this strange tension where they are business owners, they have a business, but they don't want to be business owners. They don't want to be in business. And when we've seen people make the shift to saying, it's a surrender. It's like a spiritual, emotional surrender, saying, you know what? The work I do is beautiful. It's a business, and I have to embrace and surrender to the reality that it is a business. And if I'm going to do that, then I need to understand, how do I care for this business? How do I care for this business so that it doesn't become something that I'm not happy with? How do I care for this business so that I'm cared for? How do I, take a step back and come into a healthy relationship in my heart with business development, with the financial aspects, and really see that, and so this is really one of the biggest switches that a business owner can go through, is to embrace that. And then they begin to see, oh, it needs some care. It needs some care, that in fact, the business is your biggest client, or your biggest customer, because the business itself is what's going to generate your livelihood. And other customers and clients, as great as they are, will come and go, but the business is what is going to be really solid. And so to have a healthy relationship, I'll put it a different way. A lot of times, if you think about it as a relationship, if you were in a relationship with someone, with a beloved, an intimate relationship, and you kept saying, God, I don't really want to spend time with them. Oh, they keep bothering me. Oh, they're not doing it right. I just want more from them, but I don't want to give anything to, it's like, if you bring this kind of relationship to a person, they're not going to stick around very long, rightfully so. And we would, hopefully, a healthy person would recognize that as, oh, I'm not being a very good partner. I'm not being a very good person in this relationship. I need to, change up how I'm in relationship. It's the same thing with the business. If we're constantly abusing the business, if we're constantly like in a negative reaction to the business, how are we going to find the love? How are we going to care for it? How are we going to find a sustainable, beautiful, caring way to be in business? We like to say that every act of business can be an act of love. But an active love can only arise when we're accessing love, when we're full of love. And when we do that, then our businesses can be full of love and we can actually enjoy it. The number of people that we've worked with who say, God, you did it to me. I hate you because now I love marketing. I mean, they're joking, but it's like they've seen marketing for what it really is, or they've seen business for what it really can be. And they've learned to love it, not to lose their values, not to love the dysfunctional crap that's out in the world, but to see something beautiful and to lend their heart to it and realize that it's worthy of care.
I love that. That's a perfect answer. I think, well, certainly with your own story, I see that it clearly takes a lot of humility to be able to look at yourself and your business in that light and say, I need to be better for my business. And a lot of people struggle with that, right? They are not prepared to reconcile with the fact that they need to make improvements on their own, and you can call it personal development or whatever, but I think in life in general, the key to success is to continually progress and build on your skills, build on your expertise, understand your clients better, right? And so if you're continually engaged in that process of refining and improving, I think that's the key. And like I said, it requires a lot of humility to take an honest look at that and see the areas that need improvement. So I really appreciate that. Let's talk about how people can connect with you, because we're kind of starting to push up on time.
Yeah. So one of the things that is the most underestimated dynamic in business is how long it takes someone to make a significant purchasing decision. And I say that because I would encourage people, like there's a lot of people out there who are doing business training and consulting, and there's a lot of really good people out there, and there's some people who aren't, and there's people who talk a good game. And right now, if you like what I'm saying, I could be talking a good game and you don't know. So what we do is we encourage people to come to heartofbusiness.com and check us out. Like if this is resonating with you, get on our email list and see, like, is it consistent? Is the stuff that comes out consistent and useful? Check out some of our free stuff. I did just publish a book, which I'm very proud of. There's a lot of work, Heart-Centered Business. And it's something that you can get at any bookseller, Amazon or bookshop.org or wherever. And getting, that's a low commitment way to take a deep dive with how we do things. And so, yeah, heartofbusiness.com, our email list, and the book are two ways that I would really recommend people connect with us.
I love that. That's perfect. What's your final message to our audience out there? If you could say one last thing to encourage people, what would it be?
My dog just walked into my office. Hi, Sasha. She's like, is it time to go out? I want people to have so much compassion for themselves. This world that we've set up is not easy. And there are a lot of challenges, and there's a lot of stressors, and there's a lot of things that are worthy of our care and attention. And it's one of the reasons that we like to be really like upfront with people. Like, it takes a few years to develop a business. I want people to just rest into the spaciousness of that you don't have to do things perfectly for them to work, and you don't have to do things quickly for them to work. And that there is so much room for love and care, as well as the nitty-gritty of actually getting the pieces done. And and so the more kindness to ourselves and others, I think, the easier it is to be successful.
That's a perfect way to end this. I know we need more of that in the world, so I'm grateful for people like you, Mark, that are sharing that message. For everyone listening out there, we'll have his information in the show notes, so go there to find his website and connect with him. Thank you so much for being on the show. To everyone out there, thanks for listening. Please share this with as many people as possible. That helps us out a lot. And make sure you're subscribed on whatever platform you're listening to this on. Thank you so much again, Mark. And we'll see everyone in the next episode.